Welcome everybody. Today I'm here with none other than the amazing Veena Jetti. She's done over $800 million in multifamily real estate, which is, if I do say so myself, quite impressive. And today we're going to talk about negotiation tips. So I already talked to her a little bit about some of these things, and the first thing she says to do is find the black swan. Yes. Now, I know this is a principle from Never Split the Difference. Do you want to go into that a little bit and talk about what that means?
Yeah, and I really love negotiating. It's one of my favorite things that I do in my world of business. And so finding the black swan really means finding out what really matters to the other side. So when you're negotiating against somebody, you want to know what's really driving their motivation to negotiate with you. What do they really want out of the deal? Not what do they say they want, not the price. We all know we're negotiating on price, but what are the other things outside of that matter? And that's what I really try to look for anytime I'm negotiating, because I want to know what your pain points are. Maybe I can solve them easier because I know them and they aren't really pain points for me. And that's where I can give so that I can take somewhere else.
Yeah. And your next principle is to think win-win, right? So finding those pain points gives you an advantage over anybody else negotiating because you know what they actually want. Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, so, and that they actually line up perfectly with each other. So let's say I know that and let's talk about it in the context of a multifamily deal. And this is something that I've actually had happen to me on a deal before. We were looking to buy a deal and they wanted a certain pricing, which is fine. This is like easy to negotiate pricing because we all know it exists. Now, let's say that you as the seller, like in this case, really cared about how the transfer taxes were treated. You cared about minimizing those for yourself. And for me, I don't really care where they go because at the end of the day, they have to be paid. And whether or not I'm paying for them or you're paying for them or we're splitting them, as long as my gross purchase price is the same, it's all the same to me how it gets split up and divided. So in this example, I was talking to the broker and I said, hey, other than pricing, what's really important to this seller? And that's when the broker mentioned to me, hey, this transfer tax issue. And I don't know exactly why it was a problem for them. It might have been in their documents or their mandates or whatever, but it doesn't matter. He tells me that this is an issue and I say, okay, great, I can solve this problem. So we went back, I put together an LOI, and instead of saying, hey, you pay the transfer tax as is customary in this market, I said, hey, we're going to pay you X amount less. I just subtracted out what the cost of the transfer tax was. I'm going to pay you X amount less, but I'm going to pay 100% of the transfer tax. And what happened there, we were the ones to win the deal. Even though we weren't the highest offer, we had now solved a problem for the sellers. So you as a seller are getting what you need in that you're not paying the transfer tax. And I as a buyer am getting what I need where I'm still paying the same net purchase price. And so it's a win-win for everybody. We were able to secure the deal. Even though we weren't necessarily the highest net or gross bid, we were the highest in terms of what the problems were and solving those. So we were the highest in that regard.
That's awesome. And that was like, did you say $52 million deal?
Yes, it was $52 million.
That's incredible. So, yeah. And I think part of that just goes back to like each one of us is human and we all have different needs than just money.
Totally.
Right? And obviously this one was like in terms of like investor facing, like transfer taxes and making sure that everything like looked good, right, on paper. But like everyone has different needs than just what's obvious. And so doing that digging and doing your due diligence is definitely worth it.
Yes.
Because you beat out tons of different other competitors,
Absolutely.
Which is incredible. You've also talked about in previous times the ethos of the deal. You want to talk to us a little bit about what that means and how you can present yourself to be like a more responsible investor or buyer? Yeah,
sometimes people forget that when we're doing business, it's not all transactional. This is a relationship business. It's a give and take. And I'll give you a recent example that we had. We're actually still working on negotiating it, but we were talking to a seller who has a multifamily asset that they bought 30 years ago. They've owned it forever. And it is the pride and joy of what they've done. It's a smaller town area where they've lived for 30 years. They've managed it. They've put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. They're immigrants. So this is their American dream. And I can sense the hesitancy in selling it because it's their baby, right? It's got a very strong emotional connection. They have a very strong emotional connection to this asset, rightfully so. And one of the things that we decided to do was we are making an offer and we're going and we're telling them, and this is like totally secret sauce that I normally don't share, but this is what we're doing. We're going and we're telling them, hey, we want to buy it at X price. Here's all the terms, whatever the usual. but also within the first 6 months of ownership, we are going to rename the asset to be your name at whatever the location is. So now their name is going to be on the asset. And that way, when they're still living in this town and they're still here, they're driving with their friends, they can say, look, I built that. I did that. And that's what I mean by the ethos of the deal are sometimes just as strong as the things that we are negotiating on the table. And so being mindful of that can actually give you a competitive edge to being able to secure the deal or close the deal. And I'll say this tactic is something I actually didn't think of it on my own. I can't take the credit there. I stole it from one of my best friends in third grade, her dad. So he was an architect, and I will never forget this story because it's like 30 years later and I still remember it. But he was an architect, and he was trying to get a paint color for the project he was working on. And so the paint manufacturer kept mixing a custom color, and he kept rejecting it. And finally, like on the 20th color that they tried to send him, they sent it to him and named it after him. And it said, hey, this sample is called, his last name, Green. And he was like, I can't say no to that. So a lot of times people take a lot of pride in their name and who they are and their identity. So if you understand those things, you can utilize it to get the deal closed. He ultimately chose that green color, and the deal was closed. The paint manufacturer was happy to not be sending 100 more samples. But that's really where I got the idea and just applied it to multifamily. And you can do that with other things too. You don't have to take lessons and ideas from only real estate investors. You can take it from other sources of inspiration.
That's incredible. I love that. And your fourth point is actually get creative. I would say that's an amazing example of that.
That is the example.
But you've talked to me about some other really creative things that you've done. Can you share some of those?
Yeah, I think every deal, it takes some amount of creativity to make sure that you are addressing all of the needs of the seller, of you as the buyer, of your investors, of the lender, of the time, the market we're in, et cetera. One of the things we did and that made us really successful was during COVID, when we were trying to acquire assets, it was really tough because we didn't really know how to conduct due diligence. Like, how can we walk into 500 units where everybody and everything is telling us, don't be around anybody else, stay in your bubble? Like, that seems like a super spreader event, right? We were like, hey, we're going to take a drone and fly it throughout so that we can do due diligence. But it's still not the same as being hands-on with it. So what we did was we tried with the drones, but two, we said, okay, what about the people that just aren't going to open the doors for us to be able to get in here? Because, you know, this phenomenon happens when you go and you're like, knock, knock, it's maintenance, whatever. They're like, I have COVID. And you're like, okay, well, I have to believe you. But the problem is we couldn't complete due diligence in the allotted time that we needed. So what we did was, and this is where the creativity comes into place, we went to the seller and we said, look, whoever says that they have COVID and we can't enter, because we have to keep our people safe too. Whoever says that, we won't enter, but what we'll do is we'll hold X amount of dollars back in escrow post-close for 60 days. So that way it gives us 60 days after we close to be able to go and enter. So 2 weeks later, we could go and enter all of those units. And so that's what we did. The seller was happy because they understood that we have certain limitations to being able to acquire. We're in a global pandemic. Everybody was used to it at that time. And I think they were just kind of impressed that we were willing to troubleshoot and think outside of the box so that we could solve that problem. So being able to create solutions to problems instead of finding like a problem for every solution, we try to find the solution for every problem. And there are people that do that, and it drives me nuts, but it's allowed us to really be able to scale and to get deals done that we might not have been able to before, because we're willing to think creatively. And also, people will put up with a what if there's a why. And what that means is people will put up with what you're asking them to do if there's a why to what you're asking them to do. So if you're going to ask for something, make sure you can explain why in a way that makes sense to the other side.
Yeah, I love that. And technically they didn't even have to do that, but because they knew that you were so invested in this property and wanting to buy it, and they knew how serious you were, and you were like already, you have a track record of following through with your deals, like they were able and willing to accommodate for what you were asking for.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome. The fifth and final thing that you like to talk about is don't let the attorneys kill the deal.
Yes.
Do you want to address that? Do you want to?
No, because I'm gonna get in trouble. I'm sorry, Nick. No, I love attorneys. They're awesome, and it's not just our securities attorneys, our transactional attorneys. I love all of them. They do a great job. Their job is to protect us, to mitigate risk for us. But sometimes, especially on transactional attorneys, they can get so caught up in the weeds and the details, which again, I get it. It's what we pay them to do. We want them to be really good at that. But a lot of times when you talk directly to the seller or the other party, they're like, yeah, we don't care about this. But the attorney has made it sound like this is the hill that they're willing to die on. And so one of the things that we try to do is we try to negotiate all of the deal points directly with the seller. And then we direct the attorneys to like, hey, this is what we need. We want to give as few comments to their PSA because we want to show them that we're easy to work with and they like working with us so that they want to transact with us again, because maybe this time we're on the buy side and maybe next time we'll be on the sell side, and we want them to show us the same kind of working relationship that we want to present to them as well. So it's a two-way street. It's a small world. You never know when you're going to be working with the same people over and over. So you want to really make sure that you don't let the lawyers get the deal too into the weeds and like just kill the deal. So sorry, attorneys, I love you. I will continue to pay you a lot of money to make sure we're doing it correctly and that we're protected, but we want to make sure that we're not losing sight of what we're trying to accomplish.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. That incredible info dump. It's like drinking from a fire hose. So if we can summarize those steps, it's finding the black swan, finding that thing that's not price, that secret thing that will help you unlock more negotiation room, right?
Right.
2, looking for the win-win. 3, ethos of the deal. 4, getting creative. And 5, not letting the attorneys kill the deal once you put all that hard work in.
Yes.
So,
awesome. Those are it.
Thank you so much, Veena, negotiating master, multifamily legend, and we hope to see you on the next one.